Hi, everybody, and welcome to The Love That Loves You Back, a podcast between myself, Valerie Kabov, and my dear friend, Jonathan Freemantle. I'm an artistic miscreant, otherwise known as a self-described third-generation art professional, who's currently raising a fourth-generation art professional, born in the depths of the Pale of Settlement in the former Soviet Union, and partly raised in Australia, lived and worked in London and Paris, and 15 years ago, by a quirk of fate, relocated to Zimbabwe, where I'm the co-founder of First Floor Gallery Harare, trying to figure out life, education, art, and predominantly love of art as life goes on. And without further ado, over to Jonathan.
Thanks, Valerie. Yeah, Jonathan Freemantle. I grew up in Cape Town and studied in London. I did a long apprenticeship in fine art in the old sense, and have been more making art in one way or another ever since then. I live in Edinburgh now, but I also lived for a while in Johannesburg, where I had Hazard Gallery, and that was the context that I met Valerie about 10, 12 years ago, and just loved the conversation we had immediately about painting and how painting is everything. And that conversation's been a constant source of joy and sustenance over the years. So it does make sense that we share the conversation and look forward to where this goes.
Yeah, no, I mean, and it usually goes anywhere and everywhere, but somehow we always come back to art, and
Yeah,
because it is the love that loves us back. Thank you very
right.
much for joining us, and we look forward to sharing the journey. Hi, everybody. So this week we're, in a way, continuing our discussion of a conversation of day-to-day workability, of pragmatics of being an artist, but more specifically, the concept of a career. Because in my sort of thinking right now is that some of the derailments that we're seeing are due to the artists assuming that stardom is the necessary end goal of their accomplishment. And also, it's similar to the capitalist notion of success being quantifiable in money alone, insofar as that is a false definition of success. Everyone is entitled to their own version of success and their own definition, provided it is, fulfillment is part of it. It's like, how do we unpack success for me? We both agreed that waking up every day to do this
Yeah.
is, this being art is an extraordinary success in whatever form. But for me, the really interesting thing, and I remember thinking about this in respect to an old friend of mine who's a musician based in Sydney, and she was a workaday musician who was not really predicting or sort of prognosticating stardom. She was a jazz pianist who just did that and gigged in small jazz gigs, worked as a teacher, and made a living, like a pretty average living, but enough to get by and, have a normal life, whatever normal life is. I think that was the first time I encountered somebody who just said, this is how I make my life. And she didn't define it in terms of struggle, or doing what she was doing on the way to something else. This was the thing, and being a music teacher was part of that, and working at night was part of that. And everything was all right because that was the life. It wasn't, oh, until I record this million-selling disc or get sort of number one or play a festival. And I think with a lot of young artists, there is this kind of aspiration that has been built into it, which is actually quantified both in financial terms, but also I need to have this, I need to be with a blue chip gallery, then I need to be like Art Basel, then I need to have a solo exhibition in a museum. And it feels like this kind of hierarchy or this pyramid of achievement has been written, but it's been written by someone else, right? And the similar pyramid of achievement has also been written for galleries, for instance, of what they're expected to. And we know that we're all an industry comprised of unique individuals. It's a really bad fit to project, a cookie cutter approach, which is what capitalism or industry imposes on you. And it's a bad fit for most of us. It creates benchmarks for comparisons in which all of us are constantly forced to compare each other's achievement and put ourselves in a race in an industry where competition is not futile, but also impossible because unique talents are unique talents. So that's kind of the dystopia that was created by trying to systematize the industry.
And also because we now speak about the industry as a thing, and there's a commentary on the industry, the sort of art market is a context into which artists are kind of plopped. And the danger is to measure yourself against that. I think if you're a good artist, most of the time you will be in some way going against the trend or swimming upstream in one way or another. Your figurative paintings may be out of time with an abstract kind of moment, or your demographic or your cultural background or whatever, you just may not be trendy. But that doesn't mean that your life as an artist is unrewarding. And there's going to be people who, if you're dedicated and if you're authentic and honest and if your work is good in one way, certainly if it's good beyond the kind of average, and that happens when you push it and keep doing it, then there'll be people that want to buy your work or want to sustain that quite difficult but also privileged decision you've made. I was quite lucky that it's very timely that we're having this conversation, because one of my very first sort of models that I based the life of an artist on was my first great teacher, a man called Charles Hardaker, who, when I was 17 and arrived in London, was effectively my painting master. I had other teachers, but he was the one that I latched myself onto kind of spiritually, if you like. And a humble man, painted every day, went to the studio every day apart from Christmas, and painted more or less the same collection of objects and the view through his studio, through the door to the kind of corridor outside it, and had an incredibly focused spiritual practice that underpinned that dedication. And even when he was teaching us, you felt that this was precious time away from painting. So you really valued the spirit that he brought to the teaching, and he really changed my life as a young artist. I've held on to his example throughout my career, particularly at moments when I thought, why haven't I got this museum show? My friend's got one, I would remember his kind of monastic almost dedication to this practice. And his work would appear in shows in the New English Art Club, and then there'd be a show in the Mall. And he has one painting in the Tate, actually, from when he was young. About 3 months ago, I decided to do a tribute, a sort of show which would honor him. And that's opening on the 7th of November. And there'll be one painting of his in the show. And I'm doing 7 still lives, really. It's going to be called A Banquet to Charles. He lived that life until he was physically unable to paint. And even when he was not painting, lying in essentially his deathbed, he was still painting. He was still thinking of painting. And one of his last messages to me was in response to some images of my recent paintings I'd sent him. And he said something like, "I'm so happy to see these paintings. It makes me feel closer to painting," the act of painting. That to me is everything. It's such a magnificent example of a life well lived, of a career, if you like, because in the act of painting every day and building up and he had doubts at the end, he wondered whether it had been worth it and had he done enough. And that comes with the territory You're always wondering whether your small effort, in measurement against the great artists that have gone before you, or even your colleagues that you perceive to be doing better or worse. But your small effort accumulates. And it reminds me of another ancient hero of mine, still living, Ricky DeMarco said, which is that you will get to the end and you won't have had enough time to finish it. Believe me, this is a 95-year-old man saying this. But don't think of your life, your career as an artist. Don't think of it as many different paintings, many different shows. That's rubbish. You only make one artwork, and that artwork is your life. All of the works you make become the single gesture. That gives so much more meaning to each moment. It's how you live. It's how you present yourself to the world, the generosity of spirit that you bring to that practice. And sometimes that means completely isolating yourself from the market and the world, and doing something very untrendy that doesn't appear to be desired by the world. Sometimes it means teaching, and sharing that. And like Charles Hardaker did to me at that age when I was 17, those moments he spent with me enthused and filled me with a kind of spirit which I still carry. To me, that's the measurement of a great life or a great career, is one that's singular in its pursuit, but kind of generous in its spirit.
I also think that in this context, if you are centered in that sense, you have the humility to recognize that you're not in charge really of the impact that your work will have. It's foolhardy to think you're in control. And everyone says, oh, the dictum that you're only as good as your last show. If you're in that marketplace, right? And in a way, this is why I said in our last conversation that I'm like a big believer in the universal basic income, so that, if we can ensure that everyone is taken care of just in terms of basic, hierarchy, like Maslow's sort of basic, the first layer of needs, then you have the ultimate choice to do and achieve on your own terms. And by the same token, as an artist, I always think of the different tiers of engagement that you might have, and who are we to say that either one of them is more or less significant. There are some artists who are so purely focused on their local context and so relevant to their history in terms of that conversation with their specific place, to the point that they're not necessarily intelligible to the bigger art history, but they're extremely relevant to the people whom their work touches in their context, and that is significant. And we can speak to a lot of diverse art scenes. I mean, we're in a moment of incredible push for globalization. By the same token, we cannot pretend different ethnicities and cultures don't produce different aesthetic and visual outcomes. And then there's a richness and a beauty to it. But at the same time, there is also a conversation that happens that is unique to people who are fully engaged and in tune with that culture. And we, on a global basis, are not party to that conversation. And there's meaning and beauty to that conversation not being diluted further. And then there are some artists who will transition and who are able to speak to a bigger conversation. And that's perfectly fine. But in a way, it's not in control of any artist to decide where their talent positions them. Right. So I think a lot of things that we're talking about can be abstracted and diluted only up to a certain point.
Yeah.
And beyond that point, we actually know what we're talking about. And people are petrified of difference. People are petrified of not equalizing everything to the point of annihilating our diversity and annihilating the idea that we are built different as humans, that we all have something unique and different to contribute, right? And all the talent exists. And I think there was one point that I really wanted to address in this particular conversation, is that the idea of stardom, that everyone has to change the fucking world with what they do. And first of all, they won't. But secondly, the fact that that also should be part of their career aspiration is to constantly be reaching these utopian, world-changing heights Maybe your objective is to paint a flower. In a way, you're not in charge of that meaning. And also to force these aspirations in art school on artists, essentially to become demagogues.
Yeah.
Right? And to sign on to causes they don't have a vested interest in or an understanding of or a genuinely unique contribution to make to actually dissolves the value of their art. And eventually the sort of research that they're doing will be subsumed, by ChatGPT. What won't be subsumed is the labor of their hands, and yet they've completely delegated it to fabricators. So it'll be a fabricator with your ChatGPT outcome, but that won't make art. And I think this is the corner that they're backing themselves into, and they should just gently walk out of that. That's kind of I finally figured out what the whole story was all about.
There's multiple layers, but the kind of globalization problem of that, where stardom has to mean that you're kind of known everywhere, and that the art market, which is at its sort of top end, is fueled by millionaires and billionaires who don't exist anywhere apart from in kind of everywhere that's nice. I've been looking at chapels and temples made by artists recently because I'm considering doing one. Well, I've been asked to do one. And
Woohoo!
yeah,
Bravo!
funny enough, my brother asked his other two brothers, me being one of them, about how you would measure a sort of successful life and what are the boxes that you haven't ticked yet. And it did get me thinking about what that is, what success is. And I think my main answer is being able to wake up today and tomorrow and the day after that and still make art. That's the privilege. That's the thing that I strive for. There's this other area or this other dimension where you sort of add value. And I think that's the area of giving back to the community in some way. And I think that can take the form of teaching or essentially growing artists like what you're doing. Your kind of pastoral care is beyond just commercial.
Oh, God. Pastoral care indeed.
The example I wanted to share was when Matisse fell, I think he was sort of mortally ill, and he was in a abbey. He was basically brought back to life by these nuns. It was a kind of hospital slash abbey, I believe. And he did recover, and as a gift, he built them this chapel. And there's a beautiful stained glass and then his artwork on the walls. And we now know this beautiful little chapel as one of his great masterpieces. But I think his spirit, the spirit of that work was not, here's a crowning achievement in my career. It was, how can I give something back to this community? And I think that kind of act, if you're thinking about a great career, or you're thinking about greatness, if that's your aim, then your focus should be not sort of how big it can be and how shiny it can be and how fat the museum is or how rich the donor is. It's sort of depth of the generosity or the impact that it might have on a community or the people around you. That quite often, thank goodness for this, is the kind of act that does then kind of reverberate through generations.
And again, you don't know. You're not in charge.
No.
And I think it's really important to articulate. I often see that if you treat art as a career or in a particular type of career with sort of some kind of a golden watch, then it's something that you can build and retire from. Whereas if you're an artist, you have a life. You don't have a career. You don't have a lifestyle, you have a life. And I think it's important, even for young people who are contemplating it, to see where they position themselves. And again, like I don't tend to judge, well, I do, but I don't tend to judge people for cashing in, as it were, because there are a lot of artists who at a certain point decide that this is the time that they're just cashing in. They've worked this hard, or somebody comes to them and whispers in their ear and says, if you just do this, we will make you like several $1,000,000 and just keep doing that thing. And, I can rattle off a list of at least 12, 13, 14, 15 artists who are then at quite an early age, or like say in their 40s, start doing the whatever the thing is
Yeah.
consistently in the same stylized manner, and they earn a lot of money for it. And again, I don't judge them for doing it because some people just, want to have that quality of life. But you do think that it's in a way a measure of them shortchanging their own talent or deciding that their talent has a certain limit and then they've reached it.
Mm.
And that's why you're cashing in, is because you don't believe that you're able to reach
Yeah.
greater heights spiritually or creatively. So you prefer to achieve financially. And you don't judge people because they've made that estimation.
Quite often, if you're able to make that estimation, you've done enough work to kind of get to that point of clarity. So I also don't judge. I often think that the great kind of reward will then elude them, which is finding out what comes next, that kind of magical experience of like making a painting because you want to know what it looks like and not knowing before. And I don't mean stylistically changing all the time. It's really a kind of, to bring Charles Hardaker back into it, you may think that his work when he was 20 and his work when he was 90 looked similar. There was some diversions and he did one or two amazing kind of large scale fresco projects, but really the kind of the beat was similar, but you knew for sure when you spoke to him towards the end that he wanted to see what the next painting was going to be. He was kind of eager, excited, almost sort of childlike. What'll come from the next day? And I think when you cash out, as you put it, you lock yourself at that phase and you almost can't admit the possibility of another dimension entering. And also, I think your point of you're only as good as your last show, I think you have to have some bad shows. We need to have the
Yeah.
freedom to do bad paintings and have bad shows. And that is part of what makes the occasional great show or great work.
No, agreed. That's exactly what was occurring to me as I was speaking, is that failure is also a positive. Like having that risk is what makes it worthwhile, is that you only succeed because you failed. Once you develop a product, once you choose to make yourself into a factory, like you've closed that door. And I think failure is a beautiful space. If we don't fail, then we don't get to get up, and we discover so many things through failure, like way more than through success, to be honest.